let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. Tyler Robinson has now been jailed after the fatal shooting of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk as countless await formal charges to be pressed next week. Meanwhile, Utah Governor Spencer Cox is informed that Robinson's family alerted authorities after he implicated himself, calling their tip as crucial to mete out justice. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is traveling to Israel. He stressed upon shared goals, including preventing Hamas rule in Gaza. His visit comes after Israel's strike on Hamas leaders in Doha, which derailed ceasefire talks. And meanwhile, the UAE is warning that settlement expansion in the West Bank could jeopardize the Abraham Accords. The Israeli military is ordering Palestinians to evacuate the area around a high-rise in Gaza City's Rimmel neighborhood ahead of an airstrike. The IDF says that Hamas's infrastructure is inside or nearby and warns civilians to move south to what it calls a designated humanitarian zone. US and Chinese officials are meeting in Madrid to discuss trade irritants, including the TikTok divestiture deadline and Washington's push for G7 tariffs on China over Russian oil. Meanwhile, experts say that the talks are the fourth in 4 months and they are unlikely to deliver major breakthroughs. Venezuela says that a US Navy destroyer has illegally boarded a fishing boat with 9 fishermen on board in its exclusive economic zone and held them for 8 hours before escorting them out. Caracas has warned Washington that it is seeking provocation to justify military escalation in the Caribbean. Meanwhile, tensions are rising after Trump's warship deployment. Ukrainian drones have struck one of Russia's biggest oil refineries in Kirishi, sparking a fire after 3 drones were shot down. Moscow states that the blaze is now contained, while Kiev claims a successful strike on Russia's energy infrastructure. Nepal's new Prime Minister has stated that she will only spend 6 months in office before holding elections. This comes even as Nepal is reeling from 5 days of protests led by Gen Z, which resulted in the death of 72 protesters. Romania scrambled jets as a drone breached its airspace during a Russian attack on Ukrainian infrastructure near the border. The threat of strikes has also prompted Poland to deploy its aircraft with backing from NATO allies. Well, viewers, those were the headlines and our top focus. The United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio has arrived in Israel for an official visit just days after the Israeli Defense Forces struck Hamas leaders in Qatar's capital, Doha. Now, Rubio was greeted at the airport by U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee and is scheduled to visit the Western Wall with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, speaking before his flight, Rubio states that the United States is not happy about the strike in Doha, but he has made it clear that it would not alter Washington's strong alliance and backing of Israel. He has added that talks will focus on the strike's potential impact on truce efforts in Gaza. He has also emphasized that U.S. President Donald Trump remains determined to defeat Hamas and end the conflict, as well as secure the safe return of all hostages. The Israeli missile strike, remember, targeted Hamas leaders who were reportedly meeting in Qatar to discuss a ceasefire proposal from the U.S. administration. However, Netanyahu acknowledged that the strike failed to eliminate the intended targets. With us on the broadcast is Professor Rohan Gunaratne, International Affairs expert, joining us live from Singapore. Thank you so much for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. What do you make of Marco Rubio's visit to Israel? This, of course, comes in the aftermath of the strikes that took place in Doha. We had earlier seen the Qatari Prime Minister interact with Donald Trump and Rubio at the White House. Post the strikes, of course, they'd emphasized that Qatar hosts the US's largest base in the Middle East, and Qatar, despite having no diplomatic ties to Israel, is still engaging in negotiations with Hamas leaders trying to reach a ceasefire deal. So what do you think are the implications of this particular visit by Marco Rubio to Israel?
Pia, Marco Rubio has three objectives. One is the securing the release of the hostages, and this can be only done by working with Qatar and perhaps with Egypt. So to restart and restore those talks between Qatar and Israel and Hamas and the US and Egypt and other countries. The second objective that he has is to ensure that the aid gets into the hands of the Palestinian people, because Hamas has been looting the aid and also taking control of the aid. The third is, of course, very strategic and very important, because now all the countries in the GCC agree that Hamas should have no role to play at all in the future of Gaza. That is to ensure that Hamas is dismantled, and Marco Rubio will address the threat posed by Hamas. Hamas is today posing a threat, not only in the Palestinian territories, but Hamas has a presence overseas, both in Asia and in the Middle East and in Africa. So a comprehensive plan, and this will include the designation of Muslim Brotherhood, because Hamas is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, and that will be also one of the initiatives of the United States to blacklist this organization, which is the ideological foundation of ISIS or Islamic State, Al-Qaeda and Hamas. These will be the three main initiatives that we will see featuring in the discussions with Israel and subsequently with Qatar.
Stay on with us as we are tracking further updates coming in. We are now learning that US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has condemned the Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace, calling it unacceptable. He has added that it remains unclear if the drones were deliberately targeting Poland. NATO has promised to reinforce Europe's eastern defenses after Poland shot down the drones, marking the first time a NATO member has fired shots during the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, Rubio stressed that if the drones were intentionally aimed at Poland, it would be a highly escalatory move. Listen in to what Rubio has said.
Well, there's still a lot of gathering happening. Irrespective, this shouldn't have happened. I don't think anybody's happy about it seeing happen. You saw NATO respond to it appropriately. We don't want to see it happen again. We think it's a unacceptable and unfortunate and dangerous development in this regard. The drones were intentionally launched. There's no doubt about them. Drones were intentionally launched. The question is whether the drones were targeted to go into Poland specifically. If that's the case, that if the evidence leads us there, then obviously that'll be a highly escalatory move. There are a number of other possibilities as well, but I think we'd like to have all the facts and consult with our allies before we make, specific determinations.
Meanwhile, Poland has rejected US President Donald Trump's suggestion that the drone incursions might have been a mistake. The US has called the violations now as alarming and has reaffirmed its commitment to defending NATO territory. Meanwhile, Russia maintains that the drones were not aimed at Poland. We've also, in fact, seen incursions happening in Romania as well. There were 2 F-16s that were then mobilized by NATO allies in order to counter Moscow's drones, but it still remains unclear as to whether Russia was deliberately targeting these NATO countries or not. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Gunaratna. So, what do you make of these incursions that have been happening as of late? Do you think the war has a possibility to protract from just being one that is being fought between Russia and Ukraine to now NATO members being actively involved and not just tacitly funding it?
Pia, the drone attacks were aimed at Ukraine. If the Russians wanted to attack Poland or Romania, they would have used drones directed at specific targets, and those targets would have been struck. So, but certainly there are military errors in these operations. And because the drones violated the airspace of Poland, we have seen that NATO has responded, and we are also seeing that President Trump has issued a statement that it was fired at Ukraine and not at any other country. So I believe that after the Alaska summit, President Trump is determined to to meet with President Putin, and President Putin has invited him to Moscow. I believe that this drones issue should not be an obstacle to the larger goal of achieving peace between Russia and Ukraine. So, in that spirit and in that light, it is so important for the world not to focus on the drones that were misplaced, uh, but but to resolve the bigger dispute. There are bigger drivers between Russia and Ukraine that is persisting this war, that is continuing this war, and those have to be addressed. Only when those are addressed, there will be peace and harmony between Russia and Ukraine.
So with that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. Meanwhile, viewers, shifting focus to more news coming in. Beijing has pushed back against US pressure over Russian oil imports, stating that it neither plots nor participates in wars. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, while speaking in Slovenia, has stated that war cannot solve problems and sanctions only makes them more complex. He in fact described China as a major responsible country, remarking that it has the best record on peace and security. Now, China's remarks have come hours after US President Donald Trump urged NATO countries to stop buying oil from Moscow and impose tariffs of up to 100% on Beijing, which is Russia's biggest energy customer. Meanwhile, Washington has already penalized New Delhi with a 50% tariff on Indian goods over its purchase of Russian oil, but has not imposed the same measures on Beijing as of now. These developments come ahead of a new round of US-China trade talks in Spain, especially as tensions between Russia and Ukraine continue to escalate as the war shows no signs of abating. Joining us on the broadcast is William Yang, an analyst focusing on China. He's joining us from Taipei. Thank you for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. I believe it's the fourth round of talks that is taking place in these last 4 months between US officials and Chinese officials. Of course, up until now, Donald Trump administration has not imposed tariffs on Chinese goods as far as the import of crude Russian oil is concerned. But Trump, meanwhile, has been making these statements. He's been urging G7 partners as well. We've seen similar such statements from Zelensky as well, urging other G20 nations to also come forth and slap tariffs against China. Where do you think these talks will be headed to next? We've also seen recent reports of fentanyl and Chinese production of fentanyl and its consequent import in US as one of the key issues of a stalemate in the talks.
Exactly. I think currently both sides are facing a lot of structural difficulties to really make a major breakthrough in order for them to actually get closer to reaching a trade deal. And just as you mentioned, the US still hasn't really lifted the tariffs that they impose on China that is associated with the fentanyl because Washington remains very frustrated by the fact that China has been unable to restrict the export of all the substances that are key to manufacture fentanyl. And that is, I think, going to be an area where both sides are trying to reach a consensus. But I think at the same time, it's going to be difficult because the Chinese doesn't really want to be the one that is making the first concession, and that is the same case for the United States. And I think at the same time, Trump personally is eager to see more progress that can actually lead to a potential uh, setting the stage for him to meet with Chinese President Xi Jinping sometime next month. As we know, media reports suggest that the Chinese has already officially extended an invitation to Trump to visit Beijing and have the summit there next month. But if there is no major progress or not enough progress for Trump to feel like there is enough justification for him to go to China, that might actually limit the possibility for the summit to actually take place in Beijing.
All right, I request you to stay on with us. We're tracking further developments at this time from Southeast Asia. We're now learning that China has warned the Philippines to halt its provocation in the South China Sea as tensions are continuing to rise over contested waters. Senior Colonel Xian Junli, spokesperson for Chinese military, has stated that their forces are conducting routine patrols in the area and warned Manila against escalating disputes. Now, China's claim to the entire South China Sea is overlapping with those of several Southeast Asian nations, including the Philippines. Meanwhile, the United States has reaffirmed its support for the Philippines. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio criticized Beijing's plan to turn Scarborough Shoal into a nature reserve, calling it coercive and an attempt to assert control. Rubio also urged China to respect the 2016 court ruling that found its actions unlawful under UN clause. With us on the broadcast still is William Yang. Thank you for staying put. Another interesting development this time as far as the tensions between China and Philippines is concerned. We've been seeing exercises take place. Japan was involved as well as the US and the Philippines. Philippines is continuing its purchase of the BrahMos missile as well. And now China recently has come out and labeled Scarborough Shoal, which is lying in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, something that was recognized by the Court of Arbitration in its 2016 ruling. It's called it a nature reserve. What do you make of what is happening in the South China Sea at the moment, the terms being used by China, and how do you think the US and the Philippines plan to counter this?
Well, China's latest plan to announce the decision to set up a natural reserve around the area of Scarborough Shoal is yet just another page of their long-standing gray zone operation in the region. What that means is that they will find different reasons and justification for them to actually impose their de facto control over the waters and around that disputed reef. And we know that the Scarborough Shoal and the surrounding waters are traditionally very important fishing grounds for Philippine fishermen. And that has also become a contentious area where they have consistently been pushed away by the Chinese Coast Guard or face very aggressive approaches or incursions that is initiated by the Chinese Coast Guard. And I believe Beijing is trying to test the US commitment and responses to its military support and responsibility with the Philippines because they are treaty allies. And we immediately saw Marco Rubio that came out to condemn the Chinese decision and the plan and characterize it as coercive. And so it will be interesting to see how Beijing responds or whether Beijing actually proceeds with the implementation of this nature reserve zone. And as you alluded, it is not only just the Philippines that has territorial claim over that area of the South China Sea. In fact, Taiwan also is a claimant state to that particular reef or the surrounding waters. So it will be also very interesting to see whether these like-minded democracies decide to work together and use their collective weight to push back against China, or is China actually able to actually proceed with their plan without much resistance coming from the US and its allies?
All right, with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World. As Mr. Yang pointed out, there is a lot of militarization by the PLA Navy that is taking place. There are airstrips that are being built. We all know what is happening in Mischief Reef and Spratly Islands as well. With that, viewers, we're shifting our focus towards South Asia, particularly Nepal, where we're now learning, according to sources, that the death toll from the recent protests and the violence that has taken place in Nepal has now risen to 72, with more than 190 people being reported as injured. Remember, the unrest, which was sparked by anger over corruption and economic inequality, led to a massive demonstration by Gen Z youth. This forced the resignation of former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. Now, in the aftermath, Nepal has appointed Sushila Karki as their interim Prime Minister. Now, in her first public statement, Karki has vowed to follow the demands of the protesters, promising to work towards ending corruption and promoting economic equality. Listen in to what she said.
हाम्रो चाहिँ अब यो आगामी दिनहरुमा यो रेडी युवा पुस्ताको सोच बमोजिम चाहिँ एउटा चाहिँ काम गर्नुपर्ने भएको छ। त्यसैले यो समूहले मागेको कुरा के हो भने भ्रष्टाचारको अन्त्य, सुशासन, गुड गभर्नेन्स र एउटा समान आर्थिक समानताको कुराहरुका मागहरु गरेको हुनाले त्यो पूरा गर्नलाई हामी तपाईहरुले अठोट गर्नुपर्ने अवस्था छ। सक्दो हामीले के गर्यौं भने 6 महिना मात्रै अवधि, त्यो भन्दा बढी नबस्ने, कुनै हालतमा पनि हामीले कुरा यो आफ्ना काम कारबाही गरेर हामी चाहिँ मुक्त हुने र नयाँ आउने संसद, नयाँ आउने मन्त्रीहरूलाई जिम्मेवारी र दायित्व सुम्पिने हाम्रो चाहिँ एउटा हामीले अठोट गरेका छौं। मलाई जहाँसम्म लाग्छ यो अठोटमा यहाँहरुको साथ नपाइकन सम्भव चाहिँ छैन।
Additionally, Karki has met with Nepali officials at Singhdar, the government complex partly damaged during the protest. She has acknowledged that her name was brought forward by youth activists, stressing upon the importance of public support for a peaceful transition. Now, as of now, the Nepalese parliament has been dissolved with new elections scheduled for the 5th of March 2026. With us on the broadcast is Major General Sudhakarji, Senior Geopolitical and Strategic Defense Expert, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you so much, sir, for taking our time speaking to us on NewsX World. What we've seen taking place over in Nepal this last week has been nothing short of dramatic. Protests had successfully resulted in the ouster of the former Nepalese Prime Minister, though there was a lot of speculation whether he would resign or not. He did end up stepping down. Now, Sushila Karki, their former Chief Justice, has been sworn in as the interim Prime Minister. What do you think is next for Nepal? There's a lot of hope within the youngsters, the Gen Z youth who came out to protest for change to take place. There's been a lot of turbulence in Nepalese politics, a lot of unemployment, inflation has been high as well. So the youth were rather troubled by the fact that what they've called as nepotism and wealth inequality. So how do you see Nepal tackle this in the next couple of months?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you for getting me to your show. Quick response to your question is, the Honorable Prime Minister, who just taken over as an interim Prime Minister, she has outlined her course of action prior to assumption of his appointment. And she has started from a very tactical level of looking after the families of the deceased, the boys and girls who have passed away during the arson or during the carnage, and giving them some kind of a compensation, to put my expression in her mouth. So that would be the start point. Basically what she meant was, and what I feel as a military man, is that stabilizing the current situation is going to assume topmost priority, number one. Number two, how do you stabilize? You stabilize only when you are in touch with somebody, some leaders on ground who are triggering or sponsoring the events or the violence. So at least the demand of or the aspiration of the groups are known to the Honorable Prime Minister, and she looks into it and prepares a roadmap. So stability would ensure that there is no violence in the entire country as far as possible. One odd thing will take place, and these kind of figures that you were sharing, 72 are fatal, these numbers will keep going up because it's virtually impossible to have overall effective security cover of the country, which is approximately, you can say, around 900 kilometers by 150 250 kilometers. It's very, very difficult. Third and most important point is how to revive the economy. The economy is in a slum, and employment opportunities are very far and few. Now, this is a long-term perspective which I don't think she will be able to do justice in 6 months' time. However, she can lay out the roadmap, make the initial steps. What initial steps are to be taken? First and foremost is that for a layman's understanding, the inflow and the outflow, they have to balance out in a manner that the economy of the country is left progressive, number one. Number two, there is hardly anything being exported. The main source of economy is tourism. The tourism is totally dead. So therefore, after the normalization of the situation or concurrently, she has to make sure that the tourism department, law and order departments, they work in hand in gloves, and they bring about normalcy, project the normalcy through multimedia platforms to world over, because it's an international kind of a destination. Let people be attracted. Let there be a kind of presentation or showcasing how normal has bounced back. Nepal has bounced back to normalcy. Next point that comes to my mind is that there has to be a political process of negotiation. Until that happens, the the rules-based order or the democracy cannot restore back. As of now, there are three parties. There is a troika sort of thing existing between the communist UPL and the Congress. There has to be a preparation for re-election to be carried out in 6 months' time. And what is that preparation? The people have to be put onto the electoral roll. The election commission has to be revived. They have to actually start getting activated for the re-election. The campaigning season will be around the corner, and the people have to go and exercise their mandate. Last but not the least is that to keep the relationship with the neighbors balanced. Today, what has happened is that Nepal has become a kind of a huge debt trap country of China. China may not be coming out overtly, but huge amount of money has gone in. There is a psychological perception management taking place in China. It has penetrated into the Nepal's way of life. More than 36 Confucius institutes are there where they teach Mandarin, they teach the culture of Han Chinese. There are more than 500 China international radio stations. They're like FM radios. They are installed there. The rail connectivity has come close to Khasa, and there is a highway between Khasa to the further Kathmandu. The infrastructure development is going on. However, the workers seem to be from China. There is also all-out effort by China to make sure that the efforts made by USA to counter, contain, and contest China so that China is kept out of Nepal goes absolutely wasted, and they continue to remain as a predominant force or the country with their footprint in Nepal.
So, quick follow-up on that note, how do you think then India should navigate this and the change in the government, of course, having taken place now?
Excellent question, Pia. This question is a very relevant question. In my opinion, being a student of geopolitics, security, and strategy, India has to navigate in a very silent manner without making a noise. It is a very sensitive phase. India has to keep in mind as to how things have fortunately bounced back to some degree of normalcy and in favorable terms in Maldives. What the situation in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh are, we have to absolutely be careful and navigate. in terms of the following. First and foremost thing is never, never, ever do anything which will reflect that India is imposing on Nepal. Number two, advise only when the advice is actually solicited from Nepal. Number three, the law and order situation, because the spillover of the tourists as also the Tarai region population, because Nepal, when you talk about the low reaches, they are along the border of Bihar and UP. There are a total of 35 checkposts which had come into existence way back in pandemic time. Now, out of 35, 23 are nominated. However, 7 checkposts, joint checkposts, they have got immigration facility. I suspect if the situation is not brought under control, there is going to be a huge migration of people from Nepal into the Tarai region and further down south to Bihar and UP. Therefore, our checkposts have to be manned and we have to carry out effective screening. And last but not the least, PR, is that there is an Islamic sphere of influence which is taking place in a significant manner in Nepal. The number of masjids and madrasas have actually multiplied many times in past 2 to 3 years. And there is a large number of NGOs who have come into Nepal and operating in Nepal. And these NGOs, some of them are from Turkey, some of them are from Qatar, and they are operating along the border of Nepal and India under the garb of tree plantation and various other things which are very, very passive in nature, but they have got the potential to actually carry out radicalization spilling over to UP and Bihar. Therefore, we need to be very, very careful and we should keep our response matrix and the response teams readily available. Should Nepal ask for any kind of request, India should be the first responder to any kind of situation taking place in Nepal.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking out time speaking to us on NewsX World as we track what's taking place in Nepal. Meanwhile, we're shifting our focus towards what's happening in Australia. We're now learning that Australia will spend $8 billion to upgrade facilities at the Henderson shipyard near Perth in order to support its future AUKUS nuclear-powered submarine fleet. The Defence Minister Richard Marles has stated that the United States will also have access to the facility, which is being developed as a maintenance hub under the trilateral AUKUS deal with the United States and Britain. Now, the facility will include high-security dry docks to service nuclear submarines and is expected to host rotations of US and UK vessels before Australia takes delivery of the Virginia-class submarines. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has stated that the shipyard expansion would provide significant benefits for all AUKUS allies. Listen in to what he said.
I'm very pleased to announce that my government will provide $12 billion in new funding for the Henderson Defence Precinct right here in Western Australia. This brings our additional investment in defence over the next decade to $70 billion. When complete, this precinct will deliver continuous naval shipbuilding and AUKUS here in WA. And today's investment is another way we're delivering record defence funding to bolster Australia's capabilities. We're investing in our capability and we're investing in our relationships.
In simplest terms, the Henderson Defence Precinct will be the place that we sustain and maintain our future nuclear-powered submarines, and it will also be the place where we undertake continuous naval shipbuilding in the West. That's what the Henderson Defence Precinct is. And so in that sense, it is very much an Australian sovereign capability, and that is its purpose. But in respect of the maintenance of submarines, it is an AUKUS facility. Now, ultimately...
All right, viewers, with that, and due to a paucity of time, it's a wrap on this bulletin. More news and updates on the other side. Stay tuned on NewsX World.